Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. All right, well, welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Marlee Theil. Her LinkedIn title says Sustainability Coordinator, Graduate Research Assistant at the University of Washington. But I'm going to ask her a question that she was totally unprepared for, so this is the sound of the bus backing over you. All right? I see that you're a grad student at the UW. You went to Slippery Rock University in University of Pennsylvania. You also went to college in Florida. That's not on your LinkedIn. That's not on your LinkedIn.
So I do want to say that I did not attend college at the University of Florida. I was an employee there prior to attending the University of Washington.
All right. So for the sake of this question, you're going to have to play along like Florida was college. Okay.
Okay.
Because this is a question for you. You have 1 in 3 chance to guess this one right, because I don't think you're going to know the answer. I'm setting you up for failure just to start the episode. Welcome aboard. All right. Do you know the name Donnie Iris?
It sounds familiar, but no.
For the sake of this question, he is an alumni of which of those 3 institutions?
University of Florida.
It's Slippery Rock University. He was a musician in the 70s and 80s. He had kind of one 80s rock hit. I set you up for failure. It was before your time, before my time. So it's all good. All right. So welcome aboard. How did you get to the UW? What's your story to Seattle?
Yes. Well, I think if we're going to talk about my story and my journey of how I ended up at grad school and my love of the environment, we have to go all the way back to my childhood. If you guys are willing to go on that journey with me.
We'll do it.
Amazing. So I grew up around Pittsburgh, about 30, 40 minutes outside of the city in a more suburban, rural area. But really, some of my favorite childhood memories are in Trout Run, Pennsylvania, which is north central in the Appalachian Mountains. So my father is president of a hunting and fishing club that was founded by his grandfather in the 1920s. It's called Trout Run Hunting and Fishing Club. And I was lucky enough to spend my summers there in my childhood on the expansive property. The hunting club originally owned 700 acres of private land, and it grew to its most extensive expanse of 2,800 acres in the early 2000s. And when I was about 11, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation purchased 200 acres of the property and cleared all the trees for a highway. And that was really my first exposure into seeing the land and trees that I loved being removed and not protected. And it was a really shocking experience for me because I had so many wonderful memories there. Like me and all of my cousins would go up every summer and we'd swim in the creek and we'd catch snakes and frogs and ride ATVs and go hiking. And it was the best and some of my happiest memories. And to see all those trees cleared, it really showed me that this land and forest that I love, it's not necessarily protected and preserved the way that I want it to be. And that really set me up on a path to want to dedicate my career to protecting the environment and protecting trees.
Okay.
Yes.
So you went to the university, or more Slippery. You guys I'm teasing the East Coast, but they've got some really weird names out there. Just like I'm sure they think we've got weird names out here, but Slippery Rock University.
Yes.
Rolling
represent.
Rock beer. You know?
Yep.
What's going on with Slippery Rock?
It's a small university, but I'm really happy with the education that I got there because my program, environmental science, was pretty small. Some of my classes, there would be less than 10 of us in a classroom, which
Wow.
that would never happen here at UW. But what I think was so great about that is I really got to develop close relationships with my professors and my advisors. And I think I had a lot of really great opportunities because of that. So I'm really happy with my education. Mhm.
So you you're based on your LinkedIn, right? It says you went there from 2016 to 2019. Now you were an employee at the University of Florida. When did you start
Mm.
working there?
Yes. So I started in 2022 and worked
Okay.
there for about a year. I worked in a wildlife ecology and conservation lab, and we were specifically studying reptiles. So I worked with alligators and crocodiles and the Burmese python, which is so iconic and all over the news, this really large non-native snake that's just decimating mammal populations in the Everglades. But so I worked there for a year, and I actually moved there. Prior to that, I was living in Portland. So I
Portland,
actually,
Oregon?
yep,
Okay. Well, I got it,
yes,
Portland, Maine, Portland, Oregon. Okay.
Portland, Oregon. Yes, good question. So left Portland and moved to Fort Lauderdale with the idea that I would attend grad school at the University of Florida.
Okay.
And it was a culture shock for me leaving Portland and going to Florida. When I was in Portland, I spent all my time hiking and camping outdoors, and that's not really too much of an option in Florida. So I was really having to redevelop my hobbies and find new ways to spend my time. And don't get me wrong, I actually had a blast in Florida. I'm actually really missing some parts of Florida, but within weeks of me being there, I knew that I needed to come back to the Pacific Northwest. I was grieving for the forests and mountains here, and Florida just didn't feel like home for me. It was like it was like a fun vacation, but it didn't feel like home.
Okay.
So
So why did you select the University of Washington?
yes. So I reached out to my advisor, Patrick Tobin. He's a faculty member at the University of Washington. He is an entomologist, that is the study of insects, and his specialty is working with invasive insects. And so at that point, I had experience working with invasive plants in Portland. I was working with invasive reptiles in Florida. And I thought, how interesting to now work with invasive insects. So I reached out to him, and I I was offered a position. So the Forest Service, who funds my research, specifically the Pacific Northwest Research Station in Juneau, Alaska, that's my study region, they have these insects that have been killing trees over the past few years, and they're not sure if this behavior is normal or unique for these insects. So they basically reached out to my advisor. They were like, hey, we have this problem. We're going to give you some money to hire a grad student. Let's look for these answers. So then when I reached out to him, I basically sent him a cold email. I did not see a job posting for this position. Basically just reached out to him and said, hey, I'm interested in being a grad student. He was like, I have this project, and here we are.
And here we are.
Yes.
All right. So that gets us up to about now.
Yes.
Now let's talk about how I found out about you. And that was an article in the Seattle Times. And you are managing the cherry tree, is it phenology?
Phenology.
Phenology, the cherry tree phenology project. So for those of you that don't know what that word means, like myself, we're going to find out in a second. But what this translates to is that you're monitoring the cherry blossoms at the University of Washington, which is an iconic thing in Washington State. So first off, what the heck is phenology?
Phenology is the study of the timing of seasonal biological events. So
Can
some
you put that into layman's terms now? I mean, that's pretty layman, but let's break it down really simple.
Yes. Well, how about I give some examples?
Great.
So, an
Love it.
example of a phenological trait would be trees losing their leaves in the fall. So, the
Okay.
tree experiences environmental and biological cues, the temperature is getting colder, sunlight decreasing, and then it triggers the tree to lose its leaves. So, that's an example of phenology.
Okay.
Another example would be a caterpillar forming a cocoon after a certain amount of time, after a certain amount of life stages, forms a cocoon to then become a moth or a butterfly. That's an example of a phenological trait. So, the phenological trait that we are interested in looking at when studying the cherry trees is the timing of each bud stage before the bud reaches full bloom to become a full blossom.
Okay. And for these trees at the UW campus, approximately how long is that take?
Mhm. So we start tracking at the beginning of February, but the buds are usually dormant for about a month while we're tracking. So the buds, they start to break dormancy at the beginning of March, and by the time they're all the blossoms are in full bloom to the time that they senesce and fall off and die, it's about a 2 month period.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 1 month.
One
From the
month. Okay. So
beginning
it's
of
about a
March,
month.
yes, from the
Okay.
beginning of March to, like, the beginning of April.
So how many trees, do you know this answer? I mean, I would think you might know this answer.
Mhm.
How many cherry trees are on the UW campus?
Over 100.
Over
So
100.
we are
Wow.
tracking 107 on campus, but I know that there are a few more than that, and the only
So
reason we aren't tracking all of them right now is because some of them are inaccessible due to construction.
got it. This predates you and I, but
Mhm.
107 trees, those just didn't randomly appear. Do you know kind of the history of why the UW has these 100 plus cherry trees on the campus?
Yes, so there's a little bit of lore and mystery specifically about the quad cherries, which are arguably the most famous cherries on campus. And there are several theories about their origin because we have no direct evidence for really how they got there and where they came from. So, the first theory is that the quad cherries were originally planted at the UW Arboretum. This is a very strong theory, and this is the one that everyone refers to. It's the theory that's all over the UW Cherry Blossom webpage. But then there's debate about how they ended up at the Arboretum. So, in 1930, the city of Yokohama, Japan, donated 4,000 cherry trees to the city of Seattle. So that donation is a fact, but it has been speculated that the UW trees were part of that donation. There's also just speculation that the Arboretum purchased the cherry trees and then they ended up at UW. And so within that theory, there's a whole story, and there's an elaborate detail article that was written in 1999 by UW Magazine about how the cherries ended up being relocated from the Arboretum to UW. So in this theory, the quad cherries lived at the Arboretum until 1961, until the new 520 bridge construction threatened to demolish them. So a crew was responsible for digging up the trees and for the relocation. And there's this whole dramatic story. They were running out of time because construction was imminent and the bulldozers were hovering and the transplant was haphazard and the trees were damaged. And in near panic, the trees were brought to the quad and planted exactly where they see them today. But even though this article is so detailed and contains quotes from prominent individuals at the time, there is another theory that has discredited this theory of the cherries originally being at the Arboretum. So, a UW student in 2016, Yuki Shiotani, was an exchange student from Waseda University in Tokyo. They cited that the trees were originally planted on campus in the quad as part of the Works Progress Administration during Roosevelt presidency and during the Great Depression. So, this administration provided jobs in construction and public works projects. So, that's the other theory, that the quad cherries were originally planted there as part of this administration.
Well, let me ask you this question. I mean, isn't there scientific techniques that could age these trees?
Yes.
So if the trees were planted during the Roosevelt administration, I mean, that's 80 years ago. If they were, now we don't know how what you're not saying is how old the trees were at the Arboretum before they were moved to the UW, but that'd be 65 years ago. So these trees are at least 65, probably 70 years old at least. But has there been any studies to, I mean, all I know is, when you cut a tree down, and I'm not saying we should cut it down, but, check the rings. I don't know if that applies to a cherry tree or not, but what can you guys do? What can scientists do to date these trees?
Mm-hmm. So we do know that the trees are about 90 years old. We don't know the exact age of when they were planted, but we have been able to estimate 90. And we know that, so if they were at the Arboretum, they would have had to have been planted prior to 1936, because in 1936, the Arboretum, they developed a record-keeping system to document new plants, and the cherries are not in that system. So if they were at the Arboretum, they were before 1936. But yes, the estimate is that the trees were about 3 years old when they were planted at the quad.
Okay. Do we have a ballpark of what the average life of a cherry tree of this? No, this is a particular species of cherry tree, right?
Yes, there are a few species on campus. The famous ones in the quad are Prunus yidoensis. The common name would be Yoshino cherries.
Yoshino. Do we know what the typical lifespan of a mature tree is?
Yes. So the lifespan of these trees is usually 80 to 100 years. So these trees are nearing the end of their lifespan, which is really unfortunate. But it's kind of interesting because, so that article that I referenced a little bit ago about how the cherries ended up from the Arboretum to campus, the title of that article was "Time is Running Out on the Quad's Signature Cherry Trees." And basically it was talking about how the cherry trees are dying and they need to be replaced. And like I said, it was this very dramatic article. But that was written in 1999. And here we are over 25 years later, and we are anticipating a beautiful and full bloom within the next week or so. And the trees are healthy, and they are heavily monitored and protected by the grounds management team, which is who I work for as well. So I'd like to shout out Chris Homer, Natasha Lozano, and Sarah Shores. They are responsible for the care of the trees and protecting them from disease and other health concerns. And they know the cultural and ecological significance that these trees hold. These trees get a lot of attention and care to them. So let's just hope for many more prosperous years, and let's not write any more articles about the trees dying when they're not.
Right. So to put this for reference for the listener, we are recording this on March 13th. So when she said in a week, you're implying around March. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot. When's peak bloom going to be this year?
Yes. So right now we are anticipating the week of March 23rd. I don't think it will happen on March 23rd, but I think it will be during that week. So that weekend following the 23rd would be a great viewing time for the cherries.
Okay. And the blooms last about 7 to 14 days, if you will, depending on, if it rains and, things out of our control.
Yes, exactly. I would say about a week for the full peak bloom, but
Okay.
really the blossom display will be beautiful the week before and the week after. So,
All right. To tie back to this conversation about the age of the trees and the maintenance and all of that, has there been discussions about strategically adding trees to the campus to offset the potential, decline and, of these existing 107 trees that you're tracking?
yeah, great question. Specifically for the ones in the quad, the 27 of the original 29 are still there,
Wow.
and two of them have already died and been replaced. So there are still
Okay.
29 in the quad, but 27 of the original ones. So
Are the two new ones, are they being bullied by the old trees? I mean, are they welcome to the I'm just kidding. Sorry.
they're all welcome. Yeah, so our plan, if any of the other trees do die of old age or disease, so a nursery has created clones of those existing trees through propagation.
Okay.
Propagation is basically cutting off a branch or some roots from the tree and replanting that to grow an identical tree. And those clones are actually spread out around campus. And so the plan is that if any of the cherries die in the quad, that can be removed and replaced with the largest existing clone on campus. So each
All
cherry
right.
will most likely get replaced one at a time, and it's not going to be this dramatic experience
Right.
where we lose all the
Oh,
all the cherries in the quad at once.
that's a great sounding plan to me. I mean, that just keeps the whole thing, going. I'm surprised actually that, you've only lost two trees over all this period of time. That's pretty impressive.
Yes,
Okay.
and I think that can be attributed to the care of the gardeners and our campus arborists who are hardworking people and passionate.
So one thing I do know, what little I know about this whole cherry blossom phenomenon at the UW, is that down in Tacoma, there's a number of cherry trees down in Tacoma as well. And that's, let's call it less than 50 miles away. And yet it appears that the trees in Tacoma do not bloom at the same time as the trees in Seattle. They're like a week to 10 days later in the cycle. So it's interesting to me that what I think is a very small amount of distance, 40, 50 miles, a week's worth of change happens right there.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with the Tacoma cherry trees at all?
I'm not, but I have a theory.
Okay, let's go.
So I'm not sure what species of cherries are in Tacoma. Like I said, the species in the quad, that's Prunus yidoensis.
Mm-hmm.
And also on campus, also really famous, we have Prunus seriolata or Kwanzan cherries. And those are actually in the Rainier Vista. So south of Red Square, lining the walkway to the fountain, we have about, I think there's 18 Prunus seriolatas there. And they are actually known to bloom a week after the
Okay.
cherries in the quad. So that makes me think in Tacoma, it's either Prunus seriolata or a different species.
Because, I mean, obviously things, as we go closer to the equator, further from the equator, things change, but that doesn't seem to me like enough of a distance to impact a week's worth of change, 5% change. Okay.
Yes, I
So,
would agree with that. Bloom is really driven by temperature.
okay.
So I agree that going just a little bit south to Tacoma, I wouldn't think would dramatically affect the bloom peak bloom date.
So if we were looking for optimal peak bloom experience from a weather standpoint, what do these trees need to really have a substantial, impressive bloom?
Mhm. So cherries and most flowering species, they have a series of temperature requirements needed in order to progress through the stages and reach full bloom. So they require periods of cold temperatures, which break dormancy and prepare for spring growth. We call that chilling units. And
Okay.
they also require periods of warm temperatures to initiate flower development and blooming. We call those heating units. So, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to give you guys an example. I'm going to make up some numbers to explain this process to you. So let's say that the buds are dormant. That's their first stage of development. And in order for those buds to wake up and progress to the next stage, they need 10 days or 10 heating units of temperatures above 50 degrees. So let's say on Monday, the temperature is 51 degrees. Great. The buds accumulate one heating unit because the temperature is higher than our hypothetical threshold of 50. On Tuesday, temperature is 55 degrees. Now the buds have 2 units because the temperature is above the threshold. Wednesday, temperature is 47 degrees. That's below our threshold. So the buds stay at 2 units. Thursday, temperature is 53. We're above the threshold again. Now the buds have 3 units, etc. So once the buds accumulate 10 heating units, then they will progress to the next stage of development.
So let me ask you a question. What happens if we had an unseasonably warm day? Let's say, you say 50, but what happens if we had a 70-degree day there? Does that count for more than 1 unit? Or what does that do?
Yes, it does. There is a certain level of being higher than the temperature. You do accumulate more units than that. Nice job.
Well, also though, would it go the other direction if we had an unseasonably late hard freeze?
Mhm.
Would that hinder development?
It
So
could.
let's say you had like 3 days of 50, just rock solid 50, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, boom, it's 32 degrees on a Thursday night. In your opinion, what does that do to the development of the tree?
It would definitely delay peak bloom. So it wouldn't, our units, it wouldn't subtract any units that it doesn't,
Okay.
wouldn't subtract units from what it already has, but it wouldn't gain any units that day, and it would push peak bloom back. So
So
these
interesting.
blossoms have to accumulate these chilling and heating units to reach full bloom. And if these requirements aren't met, then that can affect the duration of peak bloom. It can affect how many flowers reach full bloom, and they can be weaker and more likely to wilt and fall off. So these units, accumulating these units, the perfect amount of chilling units and the perfect amount of heating units, that's really what leads to our most beautiful display.
Got it. Is the U tracking historically these units? Like how do I want to say this? On what day did we get to the 10 units to start the bloom? I mean, is the U tracking all this historically?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So that's the cherry tree phenology project that I'm monitoring right now. I have about 22 students going around on campus and checking all the cherry trees. So from the beginning of February, they go out and document what stage the bud is in, and then we're able to relate that to temperature data to figure out the temperature requirements needed for the buds to progress to the next stage.
So why 22 students sounds like a lot? That's like 5 trees a student. But why so many students? And are they all of a certain major, or is this just an open posting on campus? How do you select the students?
Yeah, so 22 students is a lot, and they all are collecting data for about 2 to 8 trees, 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay.
And I bring on so many because they're volunteering to do this in their free time. They're all hardworking students studying environmental science or biology. And I'm so grateful that they chose to collect data in their free time and for what they have contributed to the project. So I'm weary of asking them too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I set them up into teams, and they're all assigned to a certain amount of trees per zone. So however they want to divide it up, as long as every tree is being documented 2 to 3 times a week. That's my
So
goal.
what is the documentation that they are gathering? What are they bringing back to you?
Yes, so they use a map of an application on their phone that's a map of all the cherry trees. So they can select the cherry trees, and they'll enter the data there. And the first thing that they're documenting is the overall stage of the tree. So they get up close and personal, checking out the buds. Then they take a big step back and they say, what is the current stage? What current stage are the buds, the majority of the buds in? So what more than 50% of the buds are in.
Okay.
And then they divide if the tree up into percentage categories. So if they say that 60%, they say the current stage, all the buds are dormant, and they say 60% of the buds are dormant. So the current stage, dormant, and then they break it down into percentages. So 60% of the buds are dormant, but 40% of the buds have just started to wake up a little bit, and they're in the second stage. They also have the option to add photos if they need help identifying any of the stages. I can look at that, but really just 3 or 4 data entries per tree.
So they're taking selfies with the tree is what you're telling me. They're
Yes, absolutely.
posting them on Instagram. Okay, got it. That's interesting to me. I mean, so how long? So the group has 2 to 8 trees, right? So how long does it take an individual to, let's say, just do a tree? Typically, how long are they spending at a tree to do this?
I would say a few minutes.
Okay, not terribly long, but not just walking by, click, click, move on. It's they're stopping. They're being purposeful. They're looking at the tree, kind of getting back to you. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It
And you take all.
can be a bit of a challenge to identify the stage of the buds, because some of them are so far away and so high up, and the buds closest to the trunk and closest to the ground usually progress through the stages a little bit earlier, because I think it has to do with heating from the ground. Like, they're closer to the ground, they're less exposed from the cold temperatures and the wind. So even though they can see the buds that are closest to the ground and closest to the trunk, when we're capturing the whole stage, they need to really take a step back and see what's going on up at the top to get an accurate estimate.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting because on the UW's website, there's this thing here right there. It says tree safety. Please do not climb the trees. So we don't want students going up the tree to look at the buds, even if it is for science. Okay. What do you do now? You take all this data for 107 trees. You've got students out there. They're gathering data. They're reporting it back to you. What do you do with that data?
Mm-hmm. So the goal is to use that data to predict peak bloom on campus. So
okay.
I'm able to review the data that the students have collected, relate that to temperatures. Now that we know the temperature requirements needed to reach full bloom, we're able to use weather forecasts to predict when peak bloom will occur.
Now, in today's day and age, are you a sports fan?
Not really.
All right. But in today's day and age, betting on sports is, prevalent. I'm almost surprised we don't have a peak bloom betting pool or something. I'm sorry, just the way it comes to mind. But it's fascinating to me. So you're taking all this data, you're looking at weather projections, and you're kind of going, where are we at in the heating units? If we're at 8 and we don't have a couple more 50-degree days for 3 or 4 days, well, we're not going to be there, so we got to push it out. And it changes. I mean, weather forecast for today could be, it's going to be 53 degrees and cloudy in Seattle, and it might only turn out to be 48. I don't know. We don't know. You don't control that. That's really kind of cool though. This is very interesting. So as the project continues to develop data over years, and so you have more data to work with, what is the hope that this project will lead to? I mean, what's the I don't want to say the big goal of it, but what's the big goal of it? Not besides just predicting peak bloom for photo opportunities for visitors to the campus.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our specific narrow goal, predict peak bloom on campus, but the broad goal is really to evaluate the effects of climate change on trees and ecosystems. And really, the long term goal with this data is to eventually create a computer model or a series of mathematical equations that can be used along with our phenology data with future climate projections to see how peak bloom may change in the future. So,
Okay.
hopefully, once we have 10 years of phenology data, this is our 8th year of data collection, we should be able to use that, apply it with future climate predictions to see how peak bloom may be altered in 40 or 50 years into the future.
Now, when we started this conversation, you mentioned going to the UW for insects, but we've been
Yes.
talking we're talking cherry blossoms. So how did you end up on the cherry blossom project?
Yes. So part of my grad student experience, everybody's is a little bit different in terms of how they're funded and what they're researching, and do they have to teach classes? Do they have to support their advisor in the classroom? Things like that. So part of my experience, I actually work for UW Grounds Management, and my title is Sustainability Coordinator. So, grounds management is a team of about 30 to 40 gardeners that maintain all the natural landscapes on campus. And if listeners have not been to campus is a really beautiful place and lots of wonderful natural spaces and green spaces on campus. So, part of my role as sustainability coordinator, I can help with developing restoration plans, invasive species management. I can help with grant writing to earn money for any sustainable projects that may benefit the grounds team or campus in general. And I also do project management, and that's where the cherry tree phenology project comes into place. So my role as
Yeah.
project manager, I train the student volunteers. I help calculate predictions for when the campus cherries will be in full bloom. And I communicate with the public because the cherry trees are a big deal and we get a lot of media coverage. So I handle that as well. And that's really why I'm here today.
I am looking. So I just did a quick search. I can't say that this is accurate because it's the internet, but campus size is approximately 634 acres. You tell me there's only 40 gardeners?
I know, right? They are hard working. They are stretched thin, really.
So when you say gardener, like the person who's mowing the quad,
Yep, they're a part of our
is
team.
that's a gardener.
Yep. Hmm.
So gardener encompasses all landscaping maintenance.
Yes, that's a great way to
Wow.
describe it. And I
Wow.
guess we do have a mow crew, but they
Mm-hmm.
are a part of our team. Mhm.
Wow. That's just, but 634 acres with 40 people.
Yeah.
That's like what, 15 acres a person that they're making. And I guess there's buildings and asphalt and it's not all landscape grounds, but still
Yes.
every time I've ever been on the campus, I have always been impressed with how well maintained the grounds are on the UW campus.
I agree
Wow. Okay.
completely. And
Okay.
I think I'm actually really happy that I get to be in this role and I get to work with the gardeners because it has given me a much more intimate relationship with UW campus. Like I know about the people who planted these trees and they're all so passionate, and like I shouted out Chris Homer earlier, taking care of the cherry trees since the early 2000s, and they're their work, it's appreciated by everybody, but I don't think that they always get the recognition that they deserve.
Well, only if things don't look good, then we go, what happened? Why, and I don't, that's just everywhere. It's like, if something's well maintained, we just expect that. And we don't really take into account what it took to keep it well maintained. You drive by somebody's lawn and you're like, oh, it always looks nice. And then one day you drive by and they hadn't mowed it that day. Oh, they've let it go. What's wrong? We don't tend to appreciate. I just still staggering to me, that number for that size campus. All right. Putting you on the spot. I want you to share a secret about cherry blossoms that you probably shouldn't tell us. There's got to be something you can. Come on.
A secret?
What? Yeah, I mean, where's the best place to view them?
Oh, okay.
Absolute in your opinion, best place. But I also want you to go into detail and say, this is when, like, time of day and all of that. Like, what's the secret? I want to go and I want to take my camera and I want to win an award for the best photo of a cherry blossom tree. If you saw my photo skills, you'd know that your task is impossible because it's just not going to happen. But anyway, where's the best place and what time?
Yes. So the best time is definitely first thing in the morning or later in the evening. Like, if you get there early, that's how you're going to beat the crowds for sure, which there will be photo bombers in your pictures if you go during the day. So definitely go early or later. And I think a lesser known spot that is equally as beautiful, behind UW Medical Center, I think there's a little less than 20 cherries, the Yoshino cherries, the same ones as the quad, all in a beautiful row down the street that really doesn't get as much attention. So if you went there, you would probably, again, have less crowds and it would still be a very beautiful display. Everyone is drawn to the quad and the walkway from Red Square. But yeah, behind UW Medical Center is another great spot to view the cherries.
Okay, excellent. What else do we need to know about the cherry trees? What haven't we maybe covered here? Because it's actually, the history of the trees themselves, the mystery surrounding was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And the study that you guys are doing to predict, I don't want to say predict, but, estimate peak bloom.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's important to mention that yes, these cherry trees are beautiful and they draw a crowd and they're wonderful, but there are other reasons to be studying cherries. So they're very sensitive to changes in climate patterns and specifically temperature. So tracking the different bud stages can provide insight about the magnitude of the effects of climate change. So changes in phenology, changing in the timing of the bud stages and when peak bloom occurs, that can affect the natural range of distribution. So where the tree is found, it can reduce photosynthesis in the tree, which is how trees produce food for itself and how it survives. It can affect pollinators, like everybody loves our native bees. And another example of a phenological trait is that pollinators have evolved alongside their food source, pollen, to feed when the flowers are in bloom. So if changes in climate affect when the flowers bloom, then there might be a mismatch between the timing of bloom and the timing of when pollinators usually feed. And pollinators are really important. So yes, the cherry trees are beautiful. Yes, we are interested in predicting peak bloom so that visitors can help plan their trip to campus. But we are also conducting this study to evaluate the effects of climate change.
You mentioned pollinators. Does the U have any? Do they have bees on campus? In other words, do they have beehives on campus, or do they raise pollinators, I guess?
Yes, we have pollinator gardens, and the gardeners actually do their best to non-destructively handle any wasps' nests or bees' nests that might appear, because they
Hmm.
they are important parts of our ecosystems. And I think a lot of people see a wasp nest and they just want to spray it with
I do.
a pesticide.
Yes.
Yes, I understand. I have been stung by wasps before and they're really terrible, but they are important parts of the ecosystems, and wasps are pollinators as well. So the gardeners really do their best to just kind of like remediate, and they'll put up signs saying, hey, there's a wasp nest nearby, like don't go into this area. So there are indeed pollinators on campus.
Okay. This is really quite interesting to me, and you've done, I think, an excellent job of explaining the whole project. I mean, from the beginning, what we think the beginning might have been with the campus trees, and to today. When you're done with your graduate studies, what do you hope to do?
Hmm. I I'm interested in restoration for sure. That's actually what I was doing when I was in Portland. I worked for a forest management company developing restoration and reforestation plans, and it was really rewarding to be able to see the change in landscape that I had helped facilitate it. So I'm I'm interested in restoration and land management in terms of, working at a wildlife refuge and saying and monitoring the animal population, saying that this is what they need to be healthy and survive, and this is how we protect our trees, and looking at the landscape as a whole and trying to keep it healthy. So I would like to work for the Forest Service, but I'm pretty open-minded. And something that I am just now learning for myself is that I can't project too far into the future what I anticipate myself doing, because because sometimes it doesn't happen that way, and your feelings change, and I could be in school for another 4 to 5 years. So I'm just taking it one day at a time.
Okay. Well, about how much longer do you have in your graduate program at the U?
Yes. So right now I'm a master's student. So
Hmm.
with an anticipated graduation date of December 2025.
Okay.
However, I am potentially interested in staying on and continuing into my PhD. Again, I'm trying to not think too far into the
Okay.
future, taking it one day at a
Right.
time.
Okay.
But if I do continue and go on to do my PhD, then from today I could probably have about 4 to 5 years,
4 more years. Okay.
which is a long time to think about.
Yeah, that is a long time. All right. So I ask my guests 3 questions, but I've got a fourth one for you today. So when you're not on campus, when you're not tracking peak bloom, when you're not herding 22 undergrad students who are looking at trees for you, when you're not interfacing with the gardeners, when you're not doing all of these other things, what do you like to do for fun?
Oh, I love hiking and camping.
Okay.
That's really my passion. I love being outdoors and taking road trips. So that's really
Okay.
what I like to do in my free time.
Where was your last road trip? Where'd you go on your
My
last one?
last road trip. Hmm. I know. Where did I go over Thanksgiving? I always take a Thanksgiving road trip since I've been away from my family for 5 years. So I haven't had Thanksgiving dinner in 5 years. So if anybody wants to invite me to their house, let me know. But but usually I take a
We're getting that request out months in advance. There's got to be somebody. I love that. Awesome. All right.
so usually I take a road trip. Oh, I drove down the Oregon coast and went to some beaches there. And I went to Mount Hood National Forest and the Columbia River Gorge outside of Portland.
Okay.
Yep, that was my
All right.
last road trip. Mhm.
Very important question.
Okay.
Super important now. Where's a great place to get coffee around the UW campus?
Yeah, so me and my lab mates, we usually go to Cafe Solstice, which is
Okay.
on the west side of campus. It's a really good place to just hang out and study and collaborate. So I'm not much of a coffee connoisseur though. I usually just drink my coffee black and nothing fancy to it. So take my opinion with a grain of salt, but Cafe Solstice.
Cafe Solstice. Okay. All right. You've been putting in a hard day looking at cherry blossoms. Where's a great place for lunch around the campus?
Mm-hmm. So Agua Verde Cafe, it's a Mexican spot along Portage Bay, which is south of campus. It's one of my favorite places to go. They have a lot of great options, and I'm a vegetarian and they have lots of great vegetarian options. So that's what I look for when I pick a lunch spot. I think a lot
So what's your go-to there? What's a go-to vegetarian dish?
I love their nachos. They have really good loaded nachos, jalapenos and guacamole and peppers and onions, all good stuff. And I think a lot of students on campus enjoy going there. They have a back patio overlooking the water, so it's a great spot on a sunny day.
Yeah. All right. As we wrap this up, what didn't I ask you that I should have asked you? What do you need to give a shout out to? Where can people find out more about the UW? Things like that.
Yes. So first, I just want to say that I'm so honored to even be involved with the Cherry Tree Project, but there's an incredible network of people that have contributed to this project over the years. And I just want to give some people some shout outs, if that's cool.
Let's do it.
Great. I'd like to thank Soo-Young Kim. He's a professor here at UW, and he studied the Washington, D.C. cherry blossoms that our project is based off of. And then Michael Bradshaw, he was the sustainability coordinator in my role years ago that really spearheaded the development of this project, created the protocols and things like that. I've already shouted out Chris Homer, Natasha Lozano, and Sarah Shores, all a part of UW grounds management, responsible for the cherry tree care and making sure the trees are healthy. And I'd also like to shout out Autumn Moss and Patrick Tobin. They reworked the Washington, D.C. equations to create our prediction equations here on UW campus. So I would like to thank all these people for their efforts. They're really the foundation of this project. So I'm happy to be involved. They all walked so I could run.
Okay.
And I think just the other thing that I'd like to say, my takeaway from all this and what I'd like to share with your listeners, as we admire the beauty of the cherry blossoms on campus, I think it's important to remember that all trees hold incredible value. They clean our air, they provide habitat and food for wildlife, and make our cities livable. And climate change and urbanization are putting trees under growing pressure and threatening not just their survival, but the vital benefits that they provide to us and our ecosystems. And protecting and valuing trees means protecting the health of our planet and the well-being of future generations. So my call to action for everybody: consider supporting local tree planting initiatives, advocating for urban green spaces, and finding ways to reduce your environmental footprint. Every action helps, and I really believe that every person can make a difference.
Well said.
Thank you.
All right. Now, I warned you about this. The whole episode accumulates right now. All the pressure's on you. You have this question you've agreed to answer. Okay. You've agreed to answer, and you've also agreed to give us your reason why. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You want to compose yourself? Okay.
I'm ready.
Cake or pie?
Pie.
Why?
I like fresh fruit in pies. Apple pie and peach pie, those are my favorite. And especially with an apple pie, you cannot go wrong with like the graham cracker and the crumble crust. That is just so ideal for me. I think cake can be a little too sweet and sugary for me sometimes. I do like cake. Not knocking cake, but I prefer pie.
You're throwing some shade at cake. It's okay. It's all right. So some people answer this super easy like you did. Some people like Kim and Ha. Some people are even more adamant than you are. But I do have a follow-up question. Growing up, what did you have at home, cake or pie?
Usually cake. We would have
Interesting.
cake, except on Thanksgiving. I feel like we would always have
Which you haven't had in
pies.
5 years. So remember, folks, she's looking for a place for Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's so funny. My best friend is going to laugh at this because she knows how much I love Thanksgiving dinner. So funny. But I usually had cake growing up,
Okay.
but I have been an apple pie lover for a long time. So I have been getting apple pies for my birthday for a while. So,
Okay.
but
All right.
usually cake.
Okay. All right. I was just curious because we've been working kind of on this premise that our answers were influenced by how we grew up as kids. You know, if you grew up in a household that had pie all the time, you liked pie. That is not holding up true. It really isn't holding up true. It's kind of hit or miss. It's very. I don't think there's a correlation there. I thought that for sure there would be, but not. Now I will say, I keep saying I'm going to do this. I haven't. I'm going to go back through all the episodes and write down everybody's answers and put it into a chart. But I'm pretty comfortable saying pie is in the lead, and that apple pie is the big winner there. It's if it was election season, apple pie is going to win. So. Well, I appreciate you sitting down today. I think, the cherry blossoms on the campus are iconic. Everybody in Seattle, everybody in Washington, I don't know, maybe not everybody in Washington State, but most of us in Washington State are very aware of the beauty on the UW campus and other places around the state. It's not just UW's not the only place with the cherry trees, but it is well documented. And I think you did a great job. I mean, I really appreciate you explaining it to me. I learned a lot, and you broke it down so that I could understand it. So that's great. And I hope the season is successful.
Yes, thank you so much. I forgot to mention that the UW Cherry Blossoms have their own website and social media that gives updates on peak bloom predictions, where you can see the cherries on campus, how to travel to campus, history, and much more. And we even have a webcam set up to view the quad cherries so you can see how far along in the bloom process that the trees are to help you decide when to come to campus. So our UW News and marketing teams put together these helpful and creative guides, and they're definitely worth checking out. So a simple Google search of UW cherry trees, you'll find a variety of websites.
And I'll put a link in the show notes to it for it as well. So that's pretty cool that you guys are doing that. So, Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. I'm glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.